You know, sometimes life is just so predictable. You wake up, go to work, come home to your family, 2 kids, a wife, and the same routine. But that predictability is what I loved about it. I thought I had it all. A stable job, 2 amazing kids, Lily, 9, and Ethan, 5, and a wife I'd spent the last 12 years of my life with, Katie. Yeah, Katie and I had our ups and downs, but that's marriage, right? We met back in college. She was stunning and had this aura about her that I couldn't resist. She was confident, smart, and man, she had ambition. She worked her way up in her company and became the breadwinner for a while, which I didn't mind at all. I was proud of her, but in recent years, something just felt off. I chalked it up to stress from work, raising the kids, the usual grind. Little did I know, that was just the surface. It all started with little things. Katie was always on her phone. And I'm not talking about the usual texting or scrolling through social media. She'd smile at her screen sometimes, or quickly put it away when I walked into the room. I wasn't the jealous type, so I told myself it was nothing. Maybe work stress. Maybe she was venting to her friends. We all need that, right? But then, she started working late. A lot. And not just late, overnight business trips, last-minute meetings, all with barely any warning. I'd be home with the kids, putting them to bed, making excuses for why mommy wasn't home again. Mommy's working hard to give us a good life, I'd say, feeling a knot in my stomach that I couldn't quite explain. It was hard to ignore how often those trips aligned with my cousin Jason hanging out with his best friend, Nick. Yeah, Nick was around more than usual. Jason would always be like, "Oh, Nick's in town for a bit, helping me with stuff." At the time, I didn't think much of it. But looking back, things weren't adding up. And I wasn't ready to admit it yet. The distance between Katie and me grew fast. It wasn't just emotional, physically, she felt a million miles away. We went from being affectionate, playful, to practically strangers passing in the hallway. When I'd ask her how her day went, she'd shrug it off with vague answers, her eyes glued to her phone. Sometimes, she'd laugh at a message, and when I'd ask what was funny, she'd say, "Oh, just work stuff." Work stuff didn't make her stay out late every weekend, though. The excuses became more elaborate. "I'm meeting a client," or "We've got this huge project and they're expecting me to oversee everything." And I bought it. For a while, at least. I mean, why wouldn't I? We had 2 kids, a house, a life together. I couldn't believe she'd risk that. But then, there were nights when I'd stay up late, staring at the ceiling, wondering why it felt like I was losing her. I wanted to talk to her, to fix whatever was going wrong. But every time I tried, she'd just get defensive. "Why are you always questioning me?" she'd snap. "I'm just trying to help us get ahead. Why don't you trust me?" Her reaction caught me off guard, every time. I didn't know what to say. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she was just stressed. But the growing pit in my stomach said otherwise. And then there was Nick. He started showing up more often. It seemed like every time Katie had one of her business trips, Jason and Nick were around. They'd crack jokes, make plans for the weekend, and Nick would always ask me how Katie was doing. "Man, Katie must be so busy lately, huh?" he'd say with a smile that felt a little too friendly. At the time, I brushed it off. He was Jason's best friend, after all. What reason would I have to be suspicious? But the pieces of the puzzle were there, just waiting for me to see them. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the clock. It was nearly midnight, and Katie hadn't even texted to say she'd be late. My mind was racing, her business trips, the constant phone usage, the defensiveness. I couldn't shake this feeling anymore. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our texts. They were normal. Too normal. No sign of trouble. But when I checked her social media, it was like she had become a ghost. She hadn't posted anything about us in months. No family pictures, no cute couple selfies from the past. Just vague work updates or photos from girls' nights out with faces I barely recognized. And while I was scrolling, I noticed something that hit me like a ton of bricks. Nick liked every single one of them. I tried to shake it off. Jason's best friend was just being supportive, right? But something about it gnawed at me. It wasn't just that he liked her posts, it was that he seemed to be always around whenever Katie was acting distant. The next day, I decided to talk to Jason. I figured he'd know if something was up, maybe he'd noticed a change in Katie too. We were close, always had been. I felt awkward, though, not even sure how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. Over a couple of beers at the bar, I casually asked, "So, Katie's been working a lot lately. You know how it is, corporate world and all. How's Nick doing these days? He's been around a lot." Jason shrugged. "Yeah, man, he's been busy too. But, you know Nick, always making time for the important stuff." He said it with this strange look, and something about it made me uncomfortable. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, Jason changed the subject, talking about his own problems at work. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little thing started playing in my head like a broken record. Katie's late nights, Nick's sudden presence, Jason's odd response. It felt like everyone was in on something but me. The next day, Katie left early for another meeting. And as I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, I realized I had no idea where she actually was. That thought stuck with me all day. The knot in my stomach was becoming unbearable. Every glance at my phone, every moment of silence in the house when Katie wasn't around, felt like a warning bell going off in my head. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. A few days later, after another one of Katie's vague excuses about working late, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I needed answers. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was just paranoid, but I couldn't sit with this doubt any longer. That evening, while she was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her phone. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, heart pounding, but I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to be this guy, the one who snoops, but I had to know. Nothing. No suspicious messages, no weird apps. It was all clean. Too clean, honestly. She hadn't deleted all the texts, there were some from work, friends, even me, but it was like there was a whole chunk of her life missing. No messages from Jason, no mentions of Nick. My mind raced. She was covering her tracks. I sat back, feeling sick to my stomach. I hated that I had resorted to this, but at the same time, I felt more convinced than ever that something was going on. Katie was careful, but no one's perfect. And I was going to find that slip-up. A few days later, it happened. She left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while getting the kids ready for school. As I passed by, a notification popped up, a text from someone named Jay. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place." I froze. Jay could be anyone, right? Maybe a friend, a coworker. But something about it didn't sit right. My heart was hammering in my chest as I clicked to open the conversation. And there it was. The texts weren't from Jason, as I first thought. They were from Nick. "I missed you last night. Counting down the hours till we can be together again." The air left my lungs. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands were trembling, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I quickly snapped some pictures of the messages with my phone. This was it. The confirmation I dreaded but couldn't avoid. I couldn't confront her now, not with the kids around. Not yet. I needed a plan. After finding those messages, I felt like I was living in a fog. Everything around me felt surreal, like I was watching my life from the outside. I couldn't believe it was happening. I mean, this was Nick, Jason's best friend, the guy who had been around our family for years. I thought he was just another face at the table, but now I knew he was sneaking around behind my back, with my wife. I knew I had to confront her, but the timing wasn't right. I couldn't explode in front of the kids, and I didn't want to say something I couldn't take back. I needed to keep my head straight. That weekend, I decided to test the waters. Katie had another one of her work events coming up, and I told her I'd be staying home with the kids, just like usual. She barely looked at me when I said it, her eyes glued to her phone. That was another thing I'd noticed lately, her complete detachment when we were together. It was like I didn't even exist. Saturday rolled around, and Katie got ready to leave. She looked good, like she'd put extra effort into her appearance, more than she usually did for work. A part of me wanted to scream at her right then and there, but I bit my tongue. I had a plan. As soon as she left, I called Jason. We hadn't talked much in the past few weeks, but I needed to know if he had any idea what was going on between his best friend and my wife. If there was anyone who could give me a lead, it had to be him. "Hey, man," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel my pulse racing. "You busy tonight?" "Nah, just hanging out," Jason replied. "Why, what's up?" I hesitated for a second before diving in. "Katie's out for work stuff again. Thought maybe we could grab a drink, catch up." Jason paused. "Work stuff again, huh? She's been doing a lot of that lately." There was something in his voice, something off. I couldn't tell if he knew or if he was just as in the dark as I had been. But before I could push any further, he said something that sent chills down my spine. "You know, Nick mentioned he was heading out tonight too. Said he had some plans. Kinda weird how they're both out, don't you think?" My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like Jason had unknowingly confirmed my worst fear. But I kept it cool. "Yeah, weird," I muttered, trying to steady my voice. "Anyway, maybe we should talk later." I hung up, feeling sick to my core. The pieces were falling into place. Katie had lied again, and she was probably with Nick right now. But I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I was done being passive. That night, I hired a babysitter for the kids and headed out. I had a pretty good idea of where she'd be. After all, they'd been stupid enough to leave breadcrumbs, and I wasn't about to ignore them. I drove in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with every possible outcome of what was about to happen. Would she deny it? Would she finally admit the truth? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't back down now. The messages I found earlier had mentioned a place, a cozy little spot they'd been meeting up at, just outside of town. It wasn't a hotel or a flashy restaurant, just a quiet, low-key bar where they thought no one would notice them. But I knew. I parked a block away and sat there for a moment, staring at the entrance. My heart was pounding in my chest, and part of me wanted to just turn around and go back home, to pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. I needed to face it head-on. Walking into that bar felt like entering another world. The place was dimly lit, a few couples scattered around at tables, and the faint hum of music playing in the background. And then I saw them. Katie and Nick, sitting in a corner booth, leaning in close to each other, laughing, comfortable together. Too comfortable. They hadn't noticed me yet, so I stood there for a second, watching. It was like everything else in the room faded away, and all I could see was them. Katie, the woman I'd spent over a decade building a life with, and Nick, my cousin's best friend, the guy who'd been around my family for years. And here they were, acting like I didn't exist. Something inside me snapped. I walked straight over to their table, my heart pounding in my chest, and stopped right in front of them. Katie looked up, her smile fading the second she saw me. Nick froze, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. They both knew. "Katie," I said, my voice calm, though I felt anything but. Want to tell me what's going on here? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face paled, and she glanced at Nick, as if hoping he'd somehow fix this mess. Nick shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the table, avoiding eye contact. I stared at them, waiting. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Katie spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. I almost laughed at that, not what it looks like. They were sitting here, in this dimly lit booth, looking like a couple. I had proof of their texts. Everything had been building up to this moment, and now she had the nerve to say it wasn't what it looked like. "Don't lie to me, Katie," I said, my voice rising. "I know about the messages. I know about the sneaking around. How long has this been going on?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were from guilt or just because she had finally been caught. Nick stayed silent, clearly too cowardly to step in. Katie stammered, It just happened, I swear. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I clenched my fists, trying to stay composed. "You didn't mean for it to get this far? You've been lying to me for months. Our kids, our marriage, does any of that mean anything to you?" Her tears fell then, but I couldn't feel any sympathy. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. I turned to Nick, who still hadn't said a word. "And you, Nick. My cousin's best friend. You sat in my house, played with my kids, and all the while you were sneaking around with my wife." Nick finally looked up, guilt written all over his face. "Man, I don't know what to say. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I shook my head in disbelief. "You're pathetic." The silence stretched out as the weight of everything sunk in. This wasn't some momentary slip-up. This was months of betrayal, of lies, right under my nose. I turned back to Katie, my voice shaking with anger. "Is this it, then? You and Nick? You going to just walk away from everything we built?" She didn't answer right away, and in that moment, I knew. I knew she had already made her choice. Katie sat there, frozen, her tears falling silently while Nick looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. But I couldn't walk away yet. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to leave until I got them. "Is this what you want, Katie?" I asked, my voice hoarse from holding back the anger. "You're really going to throw everything away? Our kids, our life, for him?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Nick shifted uncomfortably in his seat, probably hoping he could just disappear. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could crush me. But I needed to hear it from her. I needed her to say it. Finally, Katie whispered, "I didn't plan this, I swear. It just happened. I don't even know how to explain it." "You don't know how to explain it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around for months. Don't act like this was some accident. You made a choice, Katie. A choice to betray me. To betray our kids." Her tears came harder now, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. I'd spent months being manipulated, being lied to. I'd been the one putting our kids to bed, making excuses for why their mom wasn't home again, all while she was out with him. And now, I was done. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "Does Jason even know? Have you been sneaking around behind his back too?" Katie didn't respond, and Nick finally spoke up, his voice low and filled with guilt. "Jason doesn't know, man. I swear." I turned to him, my fists clenched. "Well, he's about to find out." At that moment, the reality of what was happening hit Katie. Her face crumbled, and she reached out toward me. "Please, don't tell Jason. Don't do this. I never wanted it to get this far." I pulled away from her touch. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the person I thought I married. She was a stranger. "It's too late for that," Katie. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. Her shoulders slumped, defeated. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about me or the affair. It was about everything. The lies, the betrayal, the way she had taken our life and shattered it without a second thought. I stood there for a moment, staring at the two of them, my heart racing. I thought about our kids, Lily and Ethan, waiting at home, completely unaware that their mother had blown their family apart. And as much as it broke me, I knew I couldn't stay. Not for them, not for her. You're going to have to explain this to the kids, I said, my voice cold. I'm done covering for you. Katie's face turned pale, and Nick shifted in his seat again, clearly not prepared for the mess he was now a part of. But I didn't care anymore. This wasn't just my problem, it was theirs, too. I turned and walked out of the bar without looking back, my mind racing. I had no idea what the next steps would be. I didn't know how to tell Jason or how to explain this mess to my kids. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to pretending everything was okay. I drove home that night, the silence in the car deafening. My mind was a blur of emotions, anger, heartbreak, and disbelief, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could think about was the kids. How was I going to explain this to them? How do you even begin to tell your children that their mother had betrayed everything? When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful from the outside. The lights were still on, and I could see the babysitter sitting on the couch, watching TV. For a split second, I wished I could just walk in and pretend nothing had happened, but that wasn't an option anymore. Everything had changed. I paid the babysitter and walked quietly to the kids' rooms. I stood in the doorway, watching Lily and Ethan sleep. They looked so innocent, so unaware of the storm that was about to hit their little world. I felt this deep ache in my chest, knowing that no matter how I tried to protect them, this was going to hurt them. And that was Katie's doing. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, my mind running through every memory of the last few months, replaying every conversation, every moment where I could have seen the signs. How could I have been so blind? Was I too trusting? Too willing to believe the best in her? The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Katie had made her choice, but I still had two kids to think about, and they needed stability. They needed to know that, no matter what, I wasn't going anywhere. And they needed the truth. Katie came home the next day. She had texted me saying she needed time to think. Time to think. What was there to think about? She walked into the house like a ghost, pale and exhausted, her eyes red from crying. But I didn't care. Not anymore. We need to talk, I said, my voice firm. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I know. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had countless family dinners, where we'd laughed and talked about our days, completely unaware that everything was falling apart behind the scenes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm going to tell the kids, I said, not leaving any room for discussion. They deserve to know the truth. Katie's eyes widened in panic. No, please. They're too young, they won't understand. They're smarter than you think, I interrupted, my tone sharp. And they deserve better than to be lied to. I won't let them live in some fantasy where their mother is a saint. You did this, Katie. Not me. She opened her mouth to argue, but she knew I was right. Her shoulders slumped, and she just nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what I had to say next. And you need to leave. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. What? You heard me, I said coldly. I can't do this anymore. You and Nick, you made your choice. You don't get to stay here and pretend like nothing happened. This is my house, and I'm not going to let you keep lying to our kids under the same roof. Katie broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I watched her, feeling nothing. The woman I thought I loved, the woman I had spent over a decade with, was gone. This version of her, the one who could betray her family so easily, was a stranger to me. "You'll have to figure out where to go," I said, standing up from the table. "But you can't stay here." "I didn't want this," she choked out between sobs. "I never wanted to hurt you, I never wanted to hurt them." I looked down at her, shaking my head. "But you did." And with that, I walked away, leaving her there at the table, broken and lost. But I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in this. All I felt was the weight of what had been destroyed. The hardest part of this entire ordeal wasn't confronting Katie. It wasn't even watching the person I'd loved for years turn into a stranger. No, the hardest part was sitting down with Lily and Ethan, knowing I was about to break their little hearts. Katie stayed in the guest room that night, giving me space to figure out how to talk to the kids. She knew there was no going back, not after what I had told her. She was going to leave, it was just a matter of when. But before any of that could happen, the kids needed to know the truth. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling the weight of what I had to do. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the family photos that lined the walls. Pictures of happier times, holidays, birthdays, trips to the beach, things I had once taken for granted. When the kids came downstairs, I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times in my head, but now that they were standing in front of me, I had no idea how to start. "Hey, can you two come sit with me for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They both plopped down at the table, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Lily, my smart and curious 9-year-old, looked at me with wide eyes. Ethan, just 5, started fidgeting with his toy car, already distracted. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice full of concern. I swallowed hard. "We need to talk about something important," I began, my heart pounding in my chest. "You know how Mommy has been really busy lately." They both nodded, though I could see the confusion in their eyes. "Well, things between Mommy and me aren't going to be the same anymore," I said slowly, trying to find the right words. "Mommy made some choices that have really hurt our family." Lily's brow furrowed, and she tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, my throat tight. "Mommy has been spending time with someone else, a friend of Uncle Jason's, more than she should have. And because of that, we can't stay together anymore." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and Ethan, still too young to fully understand, just looked confused. "What do you mean you can't stay together?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "Are you getting a divorce?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the word as I said it. "Yes, sweetheart. We're getting a divorce." Lily burst into tears, and it was like a knife in my heart. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed into my chest. "But why, Daddy? Why is this happening?" I fought back my own tears, trying to stay strong for them. "Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes, Lily. And sometimes those mistakes are too big to fix. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I will always be here for you and Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan, still processing what I had said, tugged on my sleeve. "Is Mommy leaving too?" I hesitated, not wanting to make things worse, but knowing I couldn't lie to them. "Yes, buddy. Mommy's going to live somewhere else soon." He looked down at his toy car, not fully grasping what that meant. I knew it would hit him later, when he noticed her absence. When he realized that things weren't going back to normal. Lily pulled back from my hug, her face red and tear-streaked. "I don't want you to get a divorce," she cried. "Why can't you fix it? Why can't Mommy fix it?" I looked into her eyes, wishing more than anything that I could take away her pain. "Sometimes, things are broken in a way that can't be fixed," I said gently. "But this isn't your fault, okay? None of this is your fault." She nodded through her tears, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? She was just a kid, and her whole world was falling apart. Mommy and I both love you and Ethan very much, I added. That's not going to change. We're still a family, even if we won't all be living together. I held them both close, feeling their small bodies tremble in my arms, and for the first time in days, I let myself cry too. Not just for the end of my marriage, but for the pain this was causing my kids, pain they didn't deserve. When Katie came downstairs later, the kids were still upset, but they had calmed down. She saw their tear-streaked faces and looked at me, her own eyes filled with regret. I didn't say anything to her, I didn't need to. The damage was done, and now we just had to live with it. She packed a bag later that day and left without much of a goodbye. She promised she'd be back to see the kids, but I knew things would never be the same. And as the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I didn't have to live with the lies anymore. Sadness that this was the reality we now faced. But I knew one thing for sure, I was going to be there for my kids, no matter what. I would rebuild from this, piece by piece. The house felt emptier without Katie, quieter. The kind of quiet that felt heavy, almost suffocating. For the first few days after she left, I just went through the motions, taking the kids to school, picking them up, making sure they had dinner, all the things that needed to be done. But at night, after they were asleep, the weight of everything would come crashing down. I'd sit there, in the same living room where we used to spend our evenings together as a family, and wonder how things had gotten so far off track. I replayed the last few months over and over in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when it all fell apart. But the truth was, it wasn't just one moment, it was a series of small cracks that had grown until they shattered everything. Katie didn't come back right away to see the kids. She texted a few times, trying to explain herself, saying she needed space to figure things out, but I didn't respond. What was there to say? She had made her choice. And now, it was up to me to pick up the pieces. One night, after I put the kids to bed, I found myself scrolling through old pictures on my phone. Family vacations, birthday parties, moments that seemed so happy at the time. And maybe they were, but now they felt like lies. Like everything had been leading up to this point, and I had been too blind to see it. I was still angry, furious, even, but I also felt this deep sadness, this sense of loss. It wasn't just the marriage I was mourning, it was the life we'd built. The future I thought we were heading toward. And as much as I hated what Katie had done, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of regret, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently. But those thoughts didn't last long. Because every time I started to feel that way, I remembered the texts. The lies. Nick. And all the regret turned back into anger. A few days later, Jason called. He had finally heard the news. Apparently, Katie had reached out to him, trying to explain herself. I had been dreading this conversation, knowing how close Jason was to Nick, but I had to face it. Man, I don't even know what to say, Jason said, his voice thick with disbelief. Nick. Katie. I had no idea. I could hear the pain in his voice. He had trusted Nick just like I had. And now, his best friend had blown up not just one family, but two. I'm sorry, man, I said, feeling a strange sense of guilt. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know how. Jason sighed on the other end of the line. This whole thing is messed up. I've known Nick my whole life, and I never saw this coming. I don't even know how to process it. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all hanging between us. It wasn't just my family that had been shattered, it was his too. If there's anything I can do, Jason started, but I cut him off. You've already done enough, Jason. Your family, and that's all that matters to me. We'll get through this. He agreed, and we hung up, but the conversation left a pit in my stomach. It wasn't just about losing Katie, it was about the ripple effect her betrayal had on everyone around us. It was like a bomb had gone off, and now we were all dealing with the fallout. But despite everything, I knew I had to keep moving forward. The kids needed me. I couldn't afford to sit in the ruins of what was left of my marriage. I had to rebuild, for them, and for myself. That's when I decided to make some changes. The house was filled with reminders of the life I'd shared with Katie, and it was time to reclaim that space. I started small, packing away the family photos that featured her, taking down the wedding pictures. It felt strange at first, like I was erasing part of my life, but with each item I removed, I felt a little lighter. The kids noticed too. Lily asked me why I had taken down the picture of Mommy and me from the mantel. I knelt down, looking her in the eyes, and said, "It's because things are different now, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean I don't love you or Ethan any less." She nodded, understanding more than I gave her credit for. Kids are resilient, but I knew this would be something she'd carry with her for a long time. I just had to be there to help her through it. In the following weeks, I focused on building new routines. I made sure to spend more time with Lily and Ethan, taking them to the park, helping with their homework, reading them bedtime stories. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I felt overwhelmed, like I was barely holding it together. But each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable of handling this new reality. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store, picking up some snacks for the kids, when I ran into someone from my past, Emily. We had dated briefly in college, but life took us in different directions, and we hadn't stayed in touch. But there she was, standing in front of me in the snack aisle, looking just as surprised to see me. "David," she said, smiling. "Wow, it's been forever." We chatted for a bit, catching up on life. She was single, no kids, and had just moved back to town after a few years away. There was something comforting about seeing her, someone who knew me before all the chaos, before life had gotten so complicated. Before I knew it, we were making plans to grab coffee sometime. Nothing serious, just two old friends reconnecting. But as I left the store that day, I realized something: I wasn't as broken as I thought. There was a life waiting for me beyond the wreckage of my marriage. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Running into Emily had caught me off guard in the best way possible. After months of feeling like my world had been falling apart, seeing her again was like a breath of fresh air. I wasn't looking for anything serious, and truthfully, I wasn't even sure I was ready to date. But there was something about reconnecting with someone from a simpler time in my life that gave me hope. We met for coffee the following week. I was nervous at first. This was my first date, if you could call it that, since the whole mess with Katie. I didn't know how to act, didn't know how much to share, or if it was even appropriate to talk about everything that had happened. But the moment I sat down across from Emily, all the tension seemed to melt away. "So, tell me," she said with a smile, stirring her coffee. "What's been going on in your life these days?" I hesitated for a second, then decided to be honest. "Honestly, Emily, a lot. Things have been rough." She didn't flinch or shy away. She just nodded, waiting for me to continue. "My marriage fell apart," I admitted, feeling the weight of the words. "Katie, well, she had an affair. And now we're getting a divorce." There it was, out in the open. I half expected her to react awkwardly, but instead, Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "I'm really sorry to hear that," she said softly. "I can't imagine how hard that's been." Her kindness took me by surprise. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just listen. We talked for hours that day, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. Emily didn't push or pry, she was just there, an easy presence, someone who genuinely cared. We didn't rush into anything. Over the next few weeks, we met up a few more times, grabbing lunch, going for walks, just getting to know each other again. I hadn't planned on moving forward so soon, but there was a natural chemistry between us, one that I couldn't ignore. But as things between Emily and me began to develop, I knew there was one major hurdle I had to face: telling the kids. Lily and Ethan were still adjusting to life without their mother living at home. Katie had been in and out of their lives, seeing them every other weekend, but the relationship between her and the kids felt strained. Lily was angry at her mom for what she had done, angry that our family wasn't together anymore. Ethan, being younger, didn't quite understand the situation yet, but I could tell he felt the absence of his mother. The last thing I wanted to do was introduce someone new into their lives too quickly, but I also didn't want to hide anything from them. They deserved honesty, even if it was hard. One evening, after dinner, I sat the kids down. "I want to talk to you both about something," I began, feeling the nerves creep up on me. "You know how Daddy has been spending some time with a friend lately?" Lily nodded slowly, her expression cautious. Ethan was playing with his toy car, barely paying attention, but I knew Lily would catch on quickly. "Well, her name is Emily. She's someone I knew a long time ago, before I met your mom. We've been hanging out recently, and I just wanted to be honest with you about that." Lily's eyes widened. "Is she your girlfriend?" The word felt heavy in the air, but I knew I had to be truthful. "Not exactly," I said carefully. "We're just getting to know each other again. I'm not rushing anything. But yes, I like her." Lily's face scrunched up, her emotions clearly bubbling to the surface. "But what about Mom?" she asked, her voice wavering. I took a deep breath. "Your mom and we're not going to be together anymore, sweetheart. I know that's hard to accept, but it's the truth. That doesn't change how much I love you and Ethan. Nothing will ever change that." Lily looked down at her hands, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was trying to make sense of everything: her mom's betrayal, her dad moving on, the family dynamics that had shifted so drastically. "I just don't want things to be different," she said quietly, and my heart broke for her. I pulled her into a hug. "I know. I don't want things to be different either. But we're going to be okay. We'll always be okay." Over the next few weeks, I continued seeing Emily, but I made sure to take things slow. I didn't introduce her to the kids right away. I wanted to give them time to adjust, to let things settle before shaking up their world again. Emily understood, and that only made me respect her more. Meanwhile, Katie was becoming more distant. She rarely checked in on the kids, and when she did, it felt like an obligation more than anything else. The connection she once had with Lily and Ethan was fading, and I couldn't help but feel frustrated. She had made her choices, and now the kids were paying for it. But as hard as it was to watch, I focused on the one thing that mattered most: being there for my children. And slowly, bit by bit, life started to feel more normal again. Months passed, and the wounds from Katie's betrayal slowly began to heal. Life wasn't perfect, but it was getting better, piece by piece. Emily had become a steady presence in my life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt happy. Truly happy. The kind of happiness I had forgotten was possible. I hadn't heard much from Katie in a while. After she left, her visits with the kids became less frequent, and I could tell Lily was starting to lose whatever hope she had that her mom might come back and be a real part of their lives again. Ethan, being younger, moved on easier, but I could see the confusion in his eyes whenever Katie missed another weekend. Then one day, out of nowhere, Katie vanished completely. She stopped texting, stopped calling, just disappeared. At first, I was angry, furious at her for abandoning our kids after everything she had already done. But the truth was, her absence became more of a relief than anything else. I was tired of the chaos she brought with her. My priority now was my kids, and Emily. Emily had been nothing short of amazing throughout all of this. She understood that I needed time to ease the kids into our relationship, and she never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for. Slowly but surely, I introduced her to Lily and Ethan, and though Lily was cautious at first, Emily's warmth and kindness eventually won her over. It felt like we were becoming a family, one built on trust and love, not secrets and lies. And I realized that, despite everything that had happened, I was incredibly lucky to have found someone like her. But just when I thought Katie had disappeared for good, I got a call from Jason. His voice was tense, and I could hear the weight of bad news in every word. "David. I need to tell you something. It's about Katie." I gripped the phone tighter, already dreading what was coming. "What about her?" "She gave birth, a few weeks ago," Jason said quietly. "The baby is Nick's." I stood there, stunned. I knew there was a chance she was pregnant when she left, but hearing the truth, that she had a baby with Nick, felt like a punch to the gut. And yet, I wasn't surprised. Not after everything I'd learned about her. "She didn't tell anyone," Jason continued. "Not even me, until recently. I think she was planning to run off with Nick, but things didn't work out the way she thought they would." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. Jason sighed. "Nick isn't with her anymore. He bailed on her. She's been staying with some random friend of his, but it's clear she's miserable. And, she knows about Emily. She's been asking about you." I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, pity, disbelief, but mostly, I just felt sorry for her. Katie had made her choices. She had destroyed our family, and now she was living with the consequences. Nick, the man she had risked everything for, had abandoned her just like she had abandoned me and our kids. "She's angry, David," Jason said. "Really angry. She's been telling anyone who will listen that you've moved on too fast, that Emily's just a replacement for her." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she is. Katie can't handle the fact that I'm happy now, that I've rebuilt my life without her." Jason paused, then said softly, "You deserve to be happy, man. Don't let her drag you back into her mess." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a while, letting the news sink in. Katie had given birth to Nick's baby, and now she was alone. I thought about what that meant, for me, for the kids, for everything we'd been through. But as the shock faded, I realized something: I didn't care. Not anymore. Katie had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. In the weeks that followed, I heard rumors that she had tried to patch things up with Nick, but he had already moved on. Apparently, Katie's charm had worn off quickly when reality set in. She was unhappy, stuck in a life she hadn't planned for, and it was clear she wasn't coming back home, she wasn't even trying. But that was fine. I didn't need her to come back. Neither did the kids. We were moving forward, and we were better off without her chaos in our lives. As for me, things with Emily were growing stronger by the day. She had become not just a partner, but a source of comfort and stability for me and the kids. Lily had warmed up to her completely, and Ethan adored her. We spent more time together as a family, and with each passing day, I felt more certain that this was the life I was meant to have. Katie's anger didn't bother me. Her bitterness about my new life was her burden to bear, not mine. I was done living in her shadow, done letting her mistakes control my happiness. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the porch, watching Lily and Ethan chase each other around the yard, I turned to her and smiled. "I didn't think I'd find this again," I said softly, looking into her eyes. "Happiness. Peace." Emily smiled back, her hand resting on mine. "You deserve it, David. We all do." And in that moment, I knew she was right. Katie had tried to destroy everything, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, and now I had something stronger, something real. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly at peace.